Official list next to kings known from other inscriptions as historical strongly suggests that he was not a fabrication. He was regarded as a foundational ruler, a legitimate part of their accepted history. Even more precise is a text called the Tumul inscription. This chronicle, which documents the building and rebuilding of a temple for the goddess Ninil in the holy city of Nippur, operates almost like a ledger of royal patronage. It directly mentions Gilgamesh and his son Urungal as having built up a section of the temple complex. This isn't a myth, it's a construction report. It links a specific king named Gilgamesh to a specific verifiable act of building at a specific location. Discovering this would be the ancient equivalent of finding a Roman document detailing Julius Caesar's funding for a new forum. It grounds the legendary figure in the mundane administrative reality of kingship. Further hints come from smaller artifacts. Archaeologists have unearthed cylinder seals, small, intricately carved stone tubes used to roll an impression onto wet clay as a signature, bearing inscriptions like "Servant of Gilgamesh." This implies a functioning court and administration revolving around a king of that name. His name also started appearing in the personal names of ordinary people in the centuries after his reign, a common practice of honoring a revered, deified king. Much like a modern person might be named Christian or Christopher. While these texts point to the man, the grandest evidence for a king like Gilgamesh is the city he ruled. Uruk wasn't just a town, it was an urban explosion, the blueprint for every city that followed. Located in modern-day Warqa, Iraq, on the fertile banks of the ancient Euphrates River, Uruk at its zenith was the largest city on Earth. It sprawled over 6 square kilometers, an area larger than classical Athens or Renaissance Florence, and was home to an estimated 50,000 to 80,000 people. This was a staggering concentration of humanity unprecedented in history. Life within its walls was a hum of activity, a crucible of innovation that forever changed our species. It was here around 3,200 BCE that humanity first learned to write. What began as a simple pictographic system for accountants to track grain, beer, and livestock, the world's first spreadsheets, evolved over centuries into cuneiform, a sophisticated script capable of recording law, history, and the epic poetry that would make its king immortal. This administrative complexity is further evidenced by a humble clay artifact, the beveled rim bowl. Tens of thousands of these crudely made standardized bowls have been found all over Uruk. They are widely considered to be the world's first mass-produced objects. Their purpose? They were likely ration bowls used by a central authority to pay the massive labor force required for state projects. This is the archaeological signature of a powerful, organized government capable of commanding and compensating thousands of workers. And what projects were they working on? The most famous is the one directly attributed to Gilgamesh in his own epic, The Legendary Walls of Uruk. The poem begins and ends with Gilgamesh urging a visitor to climb and admire these walls. Archaeology confirms they were no myth. A defensive rampart of kiln-fired brick, nearly 10 kilometers long and punctuated by some 900 semicircular towers, encircled the city. Building such a structure required a leader with immense authority, resources, and a pressing need for defense against rival city-states. The exact profile of a powerful king like Gilgamesh. The city itself is the physical manifestation of the kind of power the epic describes. At the heart of Uruk were 2 massive temple precincts, the Eanna district dedicated to Inanna, the powerful goddess of love and war, was a city within a city with colossal temples decorated with intricate clay cone mosaics. Nearby stood the Anu Ziggurat, a terraced platform topped with the White Temple raised high above the plain to bring the priests closer to the sky god Anu. These were not just places of worship. They were the economic and administrative engines of the state, complete with workshops, granaries, and scribal schools. To oversee such a complex society with its organized labor, burgeoning bureaucracy, and monumental construction required a singular dynamic leader. The physical remains of Uruk are perhaps the most potent circumstantial evidence that a king of Gilgamesh's stature must have existed to orchestrate it all. Some researchers even pose a tantalizing question. Was the sudden explosion of complexity at Uruk, its grid-like planning, its advanced understanding of engineering and social organization, truly a brand new invention? Or could it be, as some fringe theories propose, the rediscovery of a transfer of technology, a forgotten inheritance from an even earlier, unrecorded age? This idea speculates that the Sumerian kings, including Gilgamesh, were heirs to a lost body of knowledge. While mainstream science sees this as the dawn of civilization, others wonder if it was more of a renaissance. Gilgamesh, the king who built the walls and was recorded in the chronicles, stands at this incredible crossroads, a figure so successful and so monumental that his historical life inevitably became the seed for a legend that would outlive the very walls he built. The physical city of Uruk, with its monumental walls and temples, is the body of evidence for a great king. But the soul of his story is preserved on a far more fragile medium-baked clay. The Epic of Gilgamesh is not a book in any modern sense. It is a mosaic of cuneiform characters, a wedge-shaped script, pressed by scribes into tablets of wet clay nearly 4,000 years ago. These tablets are the hard drives of the ancient world, and in a strange twist of fate, they are far more durable than our own. While a modern server's data can be wiped by a magnetic pulse, and a hard drive can fail within a decade, these clay records survived because the libraries that housed them burned down. Fires that would have destroyed papyrus scrolls or leather parchments instead fired the clay tablets into ceramic, hardening them for millennia and unintentionally preserving the story for us to find. This epic, the oldest known piece of long-form literature in human history, is therefore a story that literally rose from the ashes. For thousands of years, the tale was lost. Its rediscovery in the mid-19th century is a drama in itself. Archaeologists excavating the ruins of the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal's great library at Nineveh shipped tens of thousands of broken tablet fragments back to the British Museum. There, a self-taught working-class genius named George Smith, who had started as a banknote engraver, painstakingly began to piece them together. In 1872, he made a discovery that would stun the world. While translating a particular tablet, he realized he was reading a story of a great flood, a divinely sent deluge, a man who builds a boat to save his family and animals, and a bird sent out to find dry land. The parallels to the biblical story of Noah were so exact and so shocking that when Smith announced his findings at a public lecture, the audience, including the Prime Minister of the time, was electrified. Here was an account of the Great Flood, but one that was written 1,000 years before the earliest known versions of the Hebrew Bible. It was a revelation that sent shock waves through the foundations of Western religion and history. The version Smith discovered, known as the Standard Babylonian Version, dates to around 1200 BCE and was compiled by a scribe scholar named Sinleki Unini. But he was more of an editor than an author. He drew upon a collection of much older, separate Sumerian poems about Gilgamesh that were already circulating 1,000 years earlier. Over a millennium, the story evolved, deepening from a series of heroic romps into a profound and cohesive meditation on life, loss, and the human condition. At the center of it all is Gilgamesh himself, a figure of terrifying and contradictory power. The epic describes him not as half god, half man, but with the very specific and puzzling ratio of being 2/3 divine and 1/3 mortal. This unique fraction is key to his entire psychology. He possesses superhuman strength, beauty, and wisdom from his divine mother, the goddess Ninsun. But that 1/3 human part inherited from his father, the deified former king Lugalbanda, is an anchor of mortality he cannot escape. It is the source of all his rage and his sorrow. At the epic's opening, Gilgamesh is not a hero, but a tyrant. Drunk on his divine power, he rules Uruk with an iron fist. The text tells us he leaves no son to his father and no maiden to her lover. His energy is so immense and unchecked that he exhausts his people with forced labor and arrogant abuses of power. The citizens of Uruk cry out to the heavens for relief. In response, the gods create a rival, a being to match Gilgamesh's strength and act as a counterweight to his ego. The goddess Aruru takes a pinch of clay, the same substance used to create humanity, and fashions a wild man named Enkidu. He is Gilgamesh's perfect opposite, born not in the city, but in the wilderness, covered in hair, living among the animals. Enkidu represents the natural, untamed world, his journey into civilization initiated by an encounter with a temple priestess named Shamhat, is a powerful allegory for the taming of human nature itself. When Gilgamesh hears of this wild man, he sees a challenge. Their first meeting is a cataclysmic wrestling match in the streets of Uruk that shakes the very doorposts of the city. But when neither can gain a decisive victory, they stop exhausted and embrace. In Enkidu, Gilgamesh has found his equal, his soulmate, his other half. The friendship that blossoms between them is one of the most moving in all of literature. Enkidu channels Gilgamesh's destructive energy into heroic adventures. Together, they journey to the cedar forest to confront the monstrous guardian Humbaba, and later they defeat the Bull of Heaven, a celestial beast sent by the spurned goddess Ishtar. But their hubris has a price. The gods decree that one of them must pay for their transgressions. It is Enkidu who is sentenced. This is the central turning point of the entire epic. Enkidu does not fall in a blaze of glory in battle. Instead, he suffers a slow, wasting illness, a deeply human and undignified end that strips away all his power. Gilgamesh is forced to watch his mighty friend, his equal, his other self, decay and vanish. The experience shatters him. He is not just grieving the loss of his friend. He is confronted for the first time with the raw, undeniable horror of his own. 1/3 mortality. In Enkidu's fate, he sees his own. A paralyzing terror seizes him. "When I die, shall I not be like Enkidu?" he wails. This fear launches him on his second great journey, a desperate, obsessive quest, not for fame or glory, but for a way to defeat death itself. He decides to find the one man known to have escaped it, a figure named Utnapishtim, the sole survivor of the Great Flood, who was granted eternal life by the gods. Gilgamesh's quest becomes a frantic flight from the human condition, an odyssey that will take him to the very ends of the earth to learn the secret of immortality. Gilgamesh's frantic quest to escape his own mortality propels him beyond the known world into a mythological landscape fraught with cosmic dangers and philosophical riddles. His journey to find Utnapishtim, the man who cheated death, is a harrowing descent into the unknown, a passage through a symbolic underworld while still alive. He travels to the Mashu Mountains, the twin peaks that guard the daily passage of the sun, a place where no mortal has ever ventured. These guardians of the solar gate challenge Gilgamesh, but seeing the desperation and divine lineage in him, they allow him to pass. He's warned that he must traverse the path of the sun, a tunnel of absolute darkness that the sun travels through at night. And he must do so in 12 double hours before the sun enters and incinerates him. This is a race against cosmic time itself. Gilgamesh runs through the crushing, unseeable blackness, emerging at the last possible moment into a dazzling, otherworldly landscape, a garden of gemstones where the trees bear carnelian fruits and the vines are laden with lapis lazuli. On the shores of the waters of death, an ocean that separates the world of the living. From the realm of the immortals, he meets Siduri, the divine alewife, the goddess of brewing and wisdom. She is a figure of pragmatic earthly counsel. Seeing his haggard appearance, clothed in animal skins and wasted by grief and terror, she at first mistakes him for a desperate criminal. When he explains his quest for eternal life, she offers him the most profound and perhaps most disappointing advice in the entire epic. She tells him his quest is futile. "Gilgamesh, where are you wandering?" she asks. "The life that you seek, you never will find. When the gods created mankind, they allotted death to mankind, but life they retained for themselves. As for you, Gilgamesh, let your belly be full, make merry day and night. Of each day make a feast of rejoicing, day and night, dance and play. Let your garments be sparkling fresh, your head be washed. Bathe in water, pay heed to the little one holding your hand. Let your spouse delight in your bosom, for this is the task of mankind. It is a beautiful call to embrace the simple, tangible joys of mortal existence." But Gilgamesh, consumed by his fear, cannot hear it. To cross the waters of death, he requires the help of Uruk, the ferryman of Utnapishtim. After an initial fit of rage in which Gilgamesh foolishly smashes the stone things that power the ferry, he is forced to cut down 300 punting poles, each 60 feet long, to push the boat across the deadly waters, as not a single drop can touch his skin. Finally, after this arduous journey, he arrives on a distant shore and beholds a man sitting by a hut, Utnapishtim, the faraway. Gilgamesh, expecting a godlike warrior, is surprised to see an ordinary-looking man. He pours out his story of grief and fear, demanding to know the secret of eternal life. Utnapishtim's response is to tell Gilgamesh his own story, which forms the heart of Tablet 11 of the epic, and is one of the most significant passages in world literature. The Mesopotamian account of the Great Deluge, Utnapishtim, reveals that he was once a king of the city of Shuruppak in those days. The council of the great gods, for reasons that are somewhat obscure, but related to the clamor and noise of humanity, disturbing their rest, decided to wipe out all life on earth with a massive flood. But one god, Ea, also known as Enki, the clever god of wisdom, had a soft spot for humanity. He couldn't openly defy the decision of the divine council, so he resorted to a trick. He flew to Utnapishtim's reed hut and whispered the warning not to Utnapishtim directly, but to the walls of the hut itself. Reed hut, wall, wall. Listen, reed hut, and pay attention, wall, he commanded, instructing Utnapishtim to tear down his house and build a boat of specific enormous dimensions. He was to abandon possessions and seek life, taking aboard the seed of all living things. The boat, a perfect cube-shaped ark called the Preserver of Life, was a gargantuan vessel sealed with bitumen and pitch. Utnapishtim loaded it with his family, his craftsmen, all his gold and silver, and the beasts of the field. The moment the flood began was one of cosmic terror. The storm commanded by the war god Ninurta and the storm god Adad was so violent that even the gods themselves were terrified. The text describes them cowering like dogs at the highest point of heaven, watching the world they had created be annihilated. For 6 days and 7 nights, the deluge flattened the world. When the storm finally abated, Utnapishtim looked out and saw that all of humanity had turned to clay. The landscape was as flat as a rooftop. His boat had come to rest on the peak of Mount Nemush. To test if the waters had receded, he sent out a dove, which returned. He sent out a swallow, which also returned. Finally, he sent out a raven, which found food, did not circle back, and did not return. The flood was over. Utnapishtim disembarked and made a sacrifice to the gods who starved for offerings, gathered like flies around the sweet-smelling smoke. The chief god, Enlil, who had instigated the flood, was furious that anyone had survived. But the wise god Ea rebuked him, arguing for a more measured approach to population control, famines, wild animals, plagues, rather than indiscriminate annihilation. As a resolution, Enlil bestowed a unique gift upon Utnapishtim and his wife. He brought them aboard the boat, touched their foreheads, and declared, "Hitherto Utnapishtim has been but human. Henceforth Utnapishtim and his wife shall be like us gods." They were taken to live forever at the mouth of the rivers in a remote paradise. This story is the devastating answer to Gilgamesh's quest. Utnapishtim explains that his immortality was not earned. It was the result of a unique, unrepeatable divine whim following a world-altering catastrophe. There is no secret to learn, no ritual to perform. To prove Gilgamesh's unsuitability for eternal life, Utnapishtim challenges him to a simple test. Stay awake for 6 days and 7 nights. Gilgamesh, exhausted from his journey, immediately falls into a deep sleep that lasts for a week. He cannot even conquer sleep, the little brother of death. As proof of his failure, Utnapishtim's wife bakes a loaf of bread for each day he sleeps. And when Gilgamesh awakens, he sees the loaves in their various states of decay, a tangible timeline of his own mortal weakness. Defeated, Gilgamesh is prepared for his journey home. But as a final parting gift, Utnapishtim's wife urges her husband to give him something. Utnapishtim reveals one last secret: a plant that grows at the bottom of the sea, a thorny herb that cannot grant immortality, but restore youth to the old. Gilgamesh, his hopes reignited, ties stones to his feet, dives to the bottom of the cosmic ocean, and retrieves the plant. But his victory is short-lived. On his journey back to Uruk, he stops to bathe in a cool pool of water. He leaves the plant on the bank, and a snake, drawn by its fragrance, slithers out, eats the plant, and immediately sheds its skin, reborn. The chance for eternal youth is lost forever. Gilgamesh sits down and weeps. It is at this moment of total loss and failure that he finally accepts his fate. The story ends where it began. He returns to his city, Uruk, and showing the ferryman Urshanabi his magnificent walls, he points to their foundations of fired brick, and speaks not of his own fame, but of the lasting work of his hands, the enduring city that will be his only true immortality. The man who survived the flood, Utnapishtim's secret. To truly grasp the cosmic drama unfolding in the Epic of Gilgamesh, one must understand the beings who pull the strings, the Anunnaki. This term refers to the primary pantheon of gods in the mythologies of Sumer, Akkad, Assyria, and Babylon. These were not distant, ethereal spirits, but powerful, often tempestuous beings with very human-like personalities, ambitions, and flaws. They were believed to have created the universe to govern every aspect of the natural world and to have designed humanity for a very specific purpose. The word Anunnaki itself is often translated as princely offspring or those of royal blood, indicating their supreme status. They were a divine council, a celestial oligarchy whose decisions determine the fate of both gods and mortals. In the earlier Sumerian texts, the Anunnaki were a somewhat vaguely defined group of the most powerful deities in the pantheon, often invoked in blessings and curses. As Mesopotamian religion evolved, their hierarchy became more structured. At the apex was the supreme triad, Anu, the god of the heavens, Enlil, the god of wind, air, and earth, and Enki. In Akkadian, Ea, the god of water, wisdom, and magic. Anu was the remote patriarch, the ultimate authority, residing in the highest heaven. Enlil was the executive of the pantheon, the enforcer of divine law, a powerful and often stern figure who resided in his temple at Nippur, the religious heart of Sumer. It was Enlil who, irritated by the noise of humanity, instigated the Great Flood. Enki, also known as Ea, by contrast, was the clever trickster, the master craftsman and scientist of the gods, and a consistent friend to mankind, often finding ways to subvert the harsher decrees of his brother Enlil, as he did by saving Utnapishtim. Below this ruling triad were other major figures who constituted the core of the Anunnaki Council. These included the moon god Nana, or Sin in Akkadian, the sun god Shamash, the formidable goddess of love and war Inanna Ishtar, and the goddess of the underworld Ereshkigal. The Gilgamesh epic is woven through with the direct interventions of these deities. Gilgamesh's own mother, Ninsun, is a minor goddess, a wild cow of the steppes, who interprets his dreams and intercedes with the sun god, Shamash, on his behalf. It is Shamash who acts as Gilgamesh's divine patron, aiding him in his battle against Humbaba by sending down powerful winds. Conversely, it is the goddess Ishtar who becomes Gilgamesh's adversary when she offers herself to him, and he scornfully rejects her, listing her many failed lovers. Her wounded pride leads her to demand that her father Anu unleash the bull of heaven to destroy Uruk. The killing of this celestial beast by Gilgamesh and Enkidu is what ultimately leads the divine council presided over by Anu and Enlil to decree that Enkidu must pay with his life. A key concept in Mesopotamian cosmology was the idea of me pronounced me. These were universal decrees of divine authority, the fundamental principles and technologies that made civilized life possible. The me were imagined as physical objects, perhaps tablets of destiny, that embodied concepts like kingship, priesthood, truth, law, writing, metalwork, and even more abstract ideas like strife and peace. The god Enki was the original keeper of most of the me. One famous myth, Inanna and Enki, tells of how the ambitious goddess of Uruk, Inanna, travels to Enki's watery domain of Eridu, gets him drunk, and tricks him into giving her over 100 of the sacred me, which he then loads onto her boat of heaven and triumphantly brings back to her home city. This myth serves as a powerful political and religious charter, explaining how Uruk superseded the older city of Eridu as the center of civilization. It illustrates that the very fabric of society was seen as a divine technology handed down or stolen from the gods. The role of the Anunnaki was not just to govern the cosmos, but also to receive sustenance from humanity. In the Mesopotamian worldview, humans were not created in God's image for a noble purpose. They were created as a slave race. The Atrahasis, another great Mesopotamian epic that also contains a flood story, provides a detailed creation myth. It describes a time when only the gods existed. The junior gods, the Igigi, were forced to do all the hard labor, digging rivers, building mountains for the senior Anunnaki gods. After thousands of years, the Igigi revolted, burning their tools and surrounding Enlil's temple. To solve this divine labor dispute, the wise god Enki proposed a solution: create a lesser being to do the work instead. In a moment of divine genetic engineering, the mother goddess Ninmah, also known as Mami or Belet Ili, mixed clay with the flesh and blood of a slain god named Geshtu-i, a god who had intelligence. From this mixture, the first humans were formed. Their purpose, their entire reason for existence, was to toil for the gods, to dig irrigation canals, farm the land, raise livestock, and most importantly, provide a steady stream of offerings of food, drink, and incense. The temple sacrifices were not just acts of devotion, they were literally the fuel that fed the divine realm. This is why the gods were so horrified by the flood. It cut off their food supply. This master-slave relationship adds a dark and complex layer to the interactions between gods and mortals. The Anunnaki were not necessarily benevolent. They were powerful, self-interested beings who could be capricious, vengeful, and terrifying. The fear of divine wrath was a constant presence in Mesopotamian life. Illness, famine, and disaster were seen as punishments from displeased gods. This makes Enki's repeated efforts to help humanity all the more remarkable. He seems to be the one Anunnaki who has a genuine sense of responsibility and even affection for his creation. Conspiracy theories and alternative historical narratives often latch onto this aspect of the myths. Was the story of the Anunnaki creating humanity from clay, mixed with a god's blood, a mythological rendering of a real event? Was Geshtu-i, who had intelligence, not a god, but a specific individual whose genetic material was used in an ancient experiment? Proponents of these ideas suggest that the Anunnaki were not gods at all, but flesh and blood extraterrestrial visitors. They interpret the myths not as religious metaphors, but as garbled historical records of a technologically advanced species creating Homo sapiens as a workforce. While dismissed by mainstream academia, this interpretation continues to fuel a powerful modern mythology, one that recasts these ancient gods as alien engineers and positions humanity as their genetically engineered offspring, forever tied to a cosmic lineage we have long forgotten. While modern conspiracies have repurposed the name for speculative narratives, the original Mesopotamian concept of Nibiru had nothing to do with a rogue planet inhabited by aliens. To the Babylonian astronomers and priests, Nibiru was a precise and vital astronomical concept, deeply embedded in their scientific and religious understanding of the cosmos. Its significance lies not in a far-flung hypothetical orbit, but in its role as a celestial anchor point, a marker of cosmic order and divine authority. The name itself in Akkadian means crossing or point of transition. This name is the key to its entire original meaning. It was not an object so much as a location, a celestial ford where paths intersected. The most important text for understanding Nibiru is the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic. This epic, recited annually during the New Year's festival in Babylon, tells the story of how the god Marduk rose to become the king of all gods. The story begins with a cosmic battle between the young gods led by Marduk and the primordial sea goddess Tiamat, a chaotic, dragon-like figure. After a titanic struggle, Marduk slays Tiamat, splits her body in two like a shellfish, and uses the halves to create the heavens and the earth. As a reward for his victory, and as a symbol of his new supreme authority, the other gods grant him numerous titles and powers. One of his primary acts as the new cosmic sovereign is to establish order in the heavens. He sets up the constellations, organizes the calendar, and establishes a very specific point in the sky that he names Nibiru. The Enuma Elish explicitly states he established the station of Nibiru to determine their celestial bands so that none might transgress or be neglectful. He set by at the stations of Enlil and Ea. In this context, Nibiru is the celestial pole star, the fixed point around which everything else revolves. It is the ferry, the crossing place of the heavens, the pivot of the cosmos. Its function is to hold the other celestial bodies in their proper courses to ensure that the cosmic order established by Marduk is maintained. In a different passage of the same epic, Nibiru is identified directly with Marduk himself as one of his 50 honorific names. Nibiru, let it hold the crossroads of heaven and earth. This dual identity is crucial. Nibiru is both a place, the supreme celestial station, and the personification of the god who controls it. By extension, the star or celestial body designated as Nibiru was seen as the visible manifestation of Marduk's power in the night sky. So which celestial body was it? Scholars have debated this for decades, and the texts are not entirely consistent, suggesting the identification may have changed over time. For a period, Nibiru was likely identified with the planet Jupiter. This makes a great deal of sense. Jupiter is the largest and most majestic planet in our solar system, a fitting celestial counterpart for Marduk, the king of the gods. As the king planet, its steady, predictable path through the constellations would have been a symbol of order and stability. Other theories suggest it could have been Mercury, which is closely associated with Marduk in other contexts, or even a particularly bright star like Sirius or Canopus. A more complex and compelling astronomical interpretation links Nibiru not to a single planet, but to a specific point of observation related to the solstices. Babylonian astronomical texts known as astrolabes and the series Mul Apen describe Nibiru as the star, the gods who ruled humanity, meeting the Anunnaki that stands in the zenith, the point directly overhead, at the moment of the summer solstice, or the point on the ecliptic, the sun's path across the sky that is highest in the sky. At that time, this made it a crucial marker for their calendar. The movements of the sun, moon, and planets were the master clock of their civilization. This celestial timekeeping determined the seasons for planting and harvesting, the dates for major religious festivals, and the reading of divine omens. Nibiru, as the crossing point that helped define the summer solstice, was a cornerstone of this entire system. To the Babylonians, it was a practical tool of immense astronomical and religious importance, the celestial linchpin that connected their earthly lives to the divine order of the heavens. It was the supervisor of the stars. It is fascinating to compare this Mesopotamian concept with similar ideas in other cultures. The Greeks, for example, had the story of Phaethon, whose name means the Shining One. He was the son of the sun god Helios. To prove his divine parentage, Phaethon demanded to drive the sun chariot across the sky for a day. Unable to control the fiery horses, he veered off course, scorching the earth, creating the deserts of Africa, and freezing other parts before Zeus was forced to strike him down with a thunderbolt to prevent total catastrophe. While the story is a myth about hubris, it reflects a deep understanding of the critical importance of the sun's precise path, the ecliptic. A deviation from this path means cosmic disaster. Both the story of Phaethon and the Babylonian concept of Nibiru as the celestial regulator highlight a shared ancient anxiety, the need for cosmic stability. These ancient civilizations recognized that their very existence depended on the predictable, orderly movement of the heavens. Nibiru was the Mesopotamian symbol of that life-giving order, a testament to their sophisticated astronomical observations and their belief in a cosmos governed by divine intelligence. It was a fixed point of stability in a universe that, as the story of the flood showed, could easily descend into chaos. The myth of Nibiru in its original context is not one of impending doom from a wandering planet, but one of divinely enforced order and the intricate celestial mechanics that make life on Earth possible. There is, however, one conspiracy theory that attempts to bridge the original meaning with the modern one. It suggests that the crossing was not just a metaphorical point, but a literal one. The point where the orbit of a yet-to-be-discovered planet intersects with the ecliptic of our known solar system. In this view, the Babylonians were not just marking a point for their calendar. They were recording the known entry point of a massive celestial body that periodically passed through their skies. They named this crossing point Nibiru and associated it with their most powerful god, Marduk, because the object that appeared at this crossing was the most powerful celestial event they ever witnessed. This theory speculates that the stability Nibiru enforced was a gravitational one, its periodic passage shepherding the other planets and asteroids. While this is pure speculation, it attempts to find a kernel of a physical event within the mythological and astronomical framework, reinterpreting the crossing point as an ancient warning sign posted on the celestial highway. The ancient complex concept of Nibiru as a celestial marker of divine order was largely forgotten for millennia, confined to dusty clay tablets and the esoteric journals of Assyriologists. That all changed in 1976 with the publication of a book that would ignite one of the most enduring and influential conspiracy theories of the modern age, The 12th Planet, by Zecharia Sitchin. Sitchin, a Russian-born, Palestine-raised author and amateur archaeologist, was fluent in modern and ancient Hebrew and had a deep knowledge of the Old Testament. He taught himself to read Sumerian cuneiform and embarked on a radical reinterpretation of the ancient Mesopotamian myths. He proposed that these texts were not myths at all, but literal, factual accounts of our planet's history. His central thesis was explosive, that our solar system contains another undiscovered planet, Nibiru, and that its inhabitants, the Anunnaki, were the architects of humanity. Sitchin's theory begins with a cosmological claim. He argued that ancient Sumerian cylinder seals, which often depict the heavens, showed not just the planets known to antiquity, but a complete solar system, with the sun at its center, surrounded by 11 other bodies. Counting the sun, the moon, and the 9 planets we know today, Pluto was still considered a planet at the time that left one unaccounted for. This, Sitchin claimed, was Nibiru, the 12th planet of his book's title. He described it as a massive world, perhaps 4 times the size of Earth, on a vast, highly elliptical orbit that takes 3,600 years to complete. According to Sitchin, this long orbit brings Nibiru from the outer darkness of space, far beyond Pluto, into the inner solar system, passing between the orbits of Mars and Jupiter. This 3,600-year period, which he equated with the Sumerian numerical concept of a shar, became the master clock for his entire timeline of events. At the heart of Sitchin's narrative are the Anunnaki. In his interpretation, they were not gods, but a technologically advanced humanoid species that evolved on Nibiru. Their home planet was dying, its atmosphere was eroding, and the Anunnaki scientists determined that the only way to save it was to suspend fine particles of gold in their upper atmosphere, creating a shield to retain heat and light. The problem was gold was scarce on Nibiru. Their home planet was dying, its atmosphere was eroding, and the Anunnaki scientists determined that the only way to save it was to suspend fine particles of gold in their upper atmosphere, creating a shield to retain heat and light. The problem was gold was scarce on Nibiru, so approximately 450,000 years ago, on one of its periodic crossings into our part of the solar system, Nibiru's gravitational pull brought it close to Earth. An expedition led by a being named Enki, the same figure from the myths, was sent to our planet because it was rich in the one resource they desperately needed, gold. Sitchin weaves a detailed saga of these extraterrestrial miners. They established their first base, which they named Eridu, home in the faraway in what is now southern Iraq. They set up mining operations primarily in southeastern Africa. For thousands of years, the rank-and-file Anunnaki astronauts toiled in these mines. But just as in the Atrahasis epic, the labor was grueling. Around 300,000 years ago, the Anunnaki miners mutinied. To solve this labor crisis, the chief scientist, Enki, proposed a daring solution. Using their advanced knowledge of genetics, they would take the native hominids already evolving on Earth, figures like Homo erectus, and upgrade them. They would imprint upon them the image of the gods in a process that Sitchin describes as in vitro fertilization and genetic manipulation. They mix the essence DNA of a young Anunnaki male with the egg of a female hominid. This genetic material was implanted into a birth goddess, a female Anunnaki named Ninti. The result was the creation of a new species, a hybrid being Sitchin called the Lulu Amelu, the mixed worker. This was the birth of Homo sapiens. This ancient astronaut theory provided Sitchin with a grand unified explanation for dozens of historical and biblical mysteries. Why did human civilization seem to appear so suddenly in Sumer? It was a gift from the Anunnaki who served as our first teachers, the Sumerian pantheon of gods. They were simply the ruling council of the Anunnaki colonists, with their rivalries and power struggles recorded as mythology. The biblical story of Adam and Eve, a distorted memory of the creation of the first human workers in the Anunnaki's Eden, the Nephilim mentioned in the book of Genesis, the sons of God who interbred with the daughters of men. These were Anunnaki astronauts taking human wives, the great flood, not a divine punishment, but a natural cataclysm caused by the gravitational effects of a passing Nibiru, an event the Anunnaki leader Enlil wanted to use to wipe out his noisy human workforce, but which Enki subverted by warning his human protege, Ziusudra. Sitchin's work gained a massive popular following because it offered compelling, if speculative, answers to profound questions about human origins. It provided a narrative that felt both scientific and mythological, connecting the dots between ancient texts, archaeological sites, and the enduring mysteries of our own existence. However, it is crucial to state that his theories are overwhelmingly rejected by the mainstream scientific and academic communities. Scholars of ancient languages and history point out that his translations of Sumerian and Akkadian texts are idiosyncratic and often based on forcing the evidence to fit his preconceived theory. For example, his interpretation of cylinder seal VA243 as a complete map of our solar system is dismissed by experts who identify the planets as simply common stars. Astronomers have found no evidence for a massive planet on a 3,600-year orbit. Such an object would create massive, easily detectable perturbations in the orbits of the outer planets, none of which have been observed. The very notion of its orbit is dynamically unstable and highly improbable. Despite this lack of scientific support, Sitchin's influence cannot be overstated. He created a powerful modern myth that tapped into a deep-seated desire to believe that we are not alone and that our history is more extraordinary than we've been told. His work is often compared to that of Immanuel Velikovsky, whose 1950 book Worlds in Collision also used ancient myths to argue for a history of cosmic catastrophes. But while Velikovsky focused on planetary chaos within our known solar system, positing Venus as a comet ejected from Jupiter, Sitchin added the crucial extraterrestrial element, taking the story beyond our solar system and into the realm of galactic empires and alien creators. He transformed the gods of myth into astronauts and their celestial battles into orbital mechanics, creating a narrative that continues to captivate millions and forms the bedrock of many subsequent UFO and ancient alien theories. While Zecharia Sitchin's The Real Nibiru, a celestial crossing, not a planet, narrative of a rogue planet named Nibiru provides a dramatic extraterrestrial explanation for periodic catastrophes, a growing body of scientific evidence suggests we don't need to look for alien intervention to find a history of planetary violence. The Earth itself holds a deep and scarred memory of cyclical cataclysms, events so powerful they have repeatedly reset the course of life and civilization. This alternative perspective, grounded not in reinterpreted myths, but in geology, ice cores, and impact proxies, paints a picture of a cosmos that is inherently dangerous, and an Earth that has been subjected to devastating bombardments from space. This field of research is most prominently championed by figures like Randall Carlson, a geological explorer and scholar who has spent decades compiling evidence for a series of catastrophic events, particularly one that occurred around 13,000 years ago. This event marks the beginning of a period of radical climate instability known as the Younger Dryas. For several thousand years prior, the Earth had been gradually warming, emerging from the depths of the last ice age. Glaciers were retreating, sea levels were rising, and a new world was taking shape. Then, approximately 12,800 years ago, something happened that plunged the northern hemisphere back into near-glacial conditions in the geological blink of an eye. Temperatures plummeted in some regions by as much as 15 degrees Celsius in less than a decade. This climatic reversal lasted for about 1,200 years before ending as abruptly as it began with another period of hyper-rapid warming. For decades, the cause of the Younger Dryas was a profound mystery. The leading explanation, now known as the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, proposes that this climatic chaos was triggered by a cosmic impact. The theory suggests that Earth passed through the debris stream of a large disintegrating comet. Instead of a single massive asteroid strike leaving a giant crater, the planet was peppered by thousands of air bursts and impacts from cometary fragments across North America, Europe, and Asia. These explosions, many more powerful than the largest nuclear weapons ever detonated, would have ignited continent-spanning wildfires. The smoke and soot injected into the atmosphere would have blocked out the sun, triggering the initial impact, winter, and rapid cooling. The heat from the impacts would have also flash-melted a significant portion of the Laurentide ice sheet, which covered much of North America at the time. This unleashed biblical-scale freshwater floods into the North Atlantic, disrupting the thermohaline circulation, the ocean conveyor belt that transports warm water from the tropics northward, and locking the planet into a prolonged cold state. Evidence for this impact event is not a single crater, but a widespread black mat layer found at archaeological and geological sites across 4 continents. This thin, dark layer, dating precisely to the onset of the Younger Dryas, is like a crime scene chalk outline for a lost world. Within this layer, scientists have found a cocktail of extraterrestrial calling cards. Millions of microscopic nanodiamonds, which can only be formed under the extreme temperature and pressure of a cosmic impact. High concentrations of iridium and platinum. Rare on Earth's surface, but common in asteroids and comets, tiny magnetic spherules of melted rock, and charcoal from the immense wildfires. Below this black mat, we find the abundant fossils of the Pleistocene megafauna, the mammoths, mastodons, saber-toothed cats, and giant ground sloths. Above the mat, they are gone. At the same time, the so-called Clovis, Paleo-Indian culture which hunted these animals across North America, abruptly vanishes from the archaeological record. The event appears to have triggered one of the most significant mass extinctions in millions of years. This is where the scientific evidence for a real cataclysm intersects with the world of myth. Randall Carlson and others argue that such a terrifying, world-altering event could not have gone unrecorded by its human survivors. They propose that the Deluge myths found in over 500 cultures around the globe, from the Mesopotamian flood of Utnapishtim to the biblical story of Noah, the Greek tale of Deucalion, and the Hindu legend of Manu, are not just fables. They are the fragmented, distorted memories of the real megafloods and tsunamis unleashed by the Younger Dryas impact. The stories of fire from the sky, of a world plunged into darkness, of a time of chaos, are seen as eyewitness accounts, passed down through generations, eventually becoming codified as myth. This perspective suggests that ancient peoples weren't just inventing stories. They were trying to describe a reality for which they had no scientific vocabulary. This framework of repeating cataclysms offers a compelling alternative to Sitchin's single-cause theory. Instead of a single planet, Nibiru causing destruction every 3,600 years. This model suggests Earth is on a predictable orbital path that intersects with the torrid meteor stream, the remnants of that giant progenitor comet, twice a year. For most of history, this crossing is uneventful, but if the densest part of the debris stream, a swarm of larger objects, also intersects with Earth's orbit, the result is a period of intense bombardment. Astronomical calculations suggest this could happen in cyclical patterns. This could explain why we see evidence not just for the Younger Dryas event, but for other periods of climatic upheaval and collapse throughout human history, such as the mysterious collapse of Bronze Age civilizations around 2300 BCE.